With the latest DLC for Battlefield 1 having been out for about 5 days now, the honeymoon period is starting to wear off a little bit. That happy smiley feeling that you get when something brand new arrives is disappearing a little bit. I'm still enjoying myself thoroughly, but you know that glossy over happiness that you get when you get something brand new? Yeah, that's starting to disappear. I'm starting to appreciate some of the smaller nuances of this expansion. With that being said, I'm also discovering a few issues, and the one I've noticed most is the balancing of the Red Tide operation. I played this operation on the first day, almost the first thing I did with the DLC, because I was more excited about the Russian Civil War side of it than I was the Russian World War I part of it, just because it's so left field. The first playthrough of the operation was great. I think I won as an attacker, but I think the reason that we won so easily was because most players hadn't really figured out the maps yet, and therefore they didn't really know how to best position themselves. As I said, I played as the Red Army and we won the entire operation, but we did lose 2 battalions along the way, so I'd say that's a pretty reasonable result for an operation, and it was a lot of fun. So I fired it up again and again over the next few days because of the good experience I'd had on the first day, and I started to notice a pattern emerging, and I think that was the result of players starting to know how the maps flowed, having a better understanding of where the enemies might be, and just generally having more experience with the maps. The Red Tide operation, 4 or 5 days after release, for an attacker can now be an absolute nightmare. Getting beyond the first sector can be a pain in the butt, and having played the operation a good 10-12 times now, I'm confident that at least 6 of those, as an attacker, we lost on the first sector. We lost all 3 battalions without even progressing further than our base spawn. This obviously is a serious issue, and it doesn't make the operation very fun for attackers really at all. The defenders have ample cover to hide behind, whilst the attackers have to advance over flat ground through a shallow trench network uphill towards the ruins of the town. The defenders have a clear line of sight right into the attacker's base, and this means very soon after anyone tries to move or make a play, they just get showered in bullets and suppressed to hell. And that makes it very, very, very difficult for progress to be made. If you're lucky enough to make it beyond the first sector, maybe you're really aggressive on that first push, or just the defending team are sleeping, I don't know. The third sector on this map has a similar situation. The attackers are given almost no cover whilst trying to move up from the rear of the destroyed town. They have to make it up a slope to the derailed train and the destroyed mill. So exactly the same thing happens here. Infantry try and make their way up the slope, and the defenders just shoot at them, and it's like cattle to the slaughter. They've got so much cover behind the destroyed train and the small trenches that they're going to barely lose any lives at all, and the attackers, well, they've got their reinforcements reduced to none in just seconds flat. I've only made it onto the second map, Tsar, about twice in the 10 or 12 games that I've played of Red Tide, and that includes the 6 games where we couldn't make it beyond the first sector. That's a pretty poor win-to-loss ratio for operations anyway, but having lost 6 of those operations on the first sector, losing all 3 battalions, that just tells me that something has to be done to this operation for attackers, at least slightly. It's got to be made just a little bit easier. In my view, any linear game mode where there is a distinct attacking and defending force, it should follow a pattern of difficulty. For the attackers, it should be easy to begin with so that they can get into the mode, and then progressively become harder as the round progresses. For the defenders, it should be the opposite. It should start harder, but become progressively easier as you go through the sectors. So if we use operations as an example, the first sector should be almost an easy capture for the attackers. But as they progress through the mode, through each sector, the capture should become harder and harder for the attackers as they push into enemy territory. The defenders should then find it easier to stop the tide of attackers and hunker down in some of those sectors and stop them from taking it. And if you look directly at some of the other operations in Battlefield 1, you can kind of see this pattern emerging. There are certain sectors in some of the operations that feature 3 flags that the attackers have to take, and that signifies the challenge for the attackers as they have to split their focus 3 ways. But it's much easier for defenders as the numbers are thinned out and they can stay put on those flags and defend them properly. And this is not the first time that DICE have had problems with balancing their operations properly. You might remember back to the first DLC, They Shall Not Pass, that included an operation called Devil's Anvil, and it suffered a very similar problem on the first sector of the operation on the first map. The attackers found it very, very difficult to take the first set of objectives. There was really clear lines of sight for the defenders, and they had trajectory up at the sides of the map as well, which gave them clear lines of sight down into the enemy spawn. Again, it was like cattle going to the slaughter. So you can see that DICE have had this problem before, and they appear to have the same problem again with Red Tide. And that's not even mentioning Monte Grappa as part of the Iron Walls operation. Does everyone remember those dreaded bunkers that the defenders just used to sit in and the attackers would fruitlessly try and flush them out? 9 times out of 10, an operation would end at that sector because they couldn't take the bunker. For the Red Tide operation to really succeed and work for both sides, you've got to remember here, the defenders have got it extremely easy at the moment, and that might become boring if you wanted to play the operation all the time. And the attackers, well, they know they're going to get curb stomped in the first sector. The Volga River map, I think, needs to be altered to allow the attackers to break out of that first sector and then push on through the map. It's fine for the map to then challenge the attackers after that point, but when you stunt the flow at the first hurdle, then you're going to turn gamers off from playing the operation because they know damn well what's going to happen. The area of the map in the first sector, I think that needs to be bolstered with more cover, both solid and destroyable, for the attackers to use and hide behind whilst the defenders look down on them. You could almost take all of that destroyed rubble that the defenders are hiding behind and just extend that into the first sector just a little bit more, and then that way the attackers would have plenty of cover that they could use. The Mark V tanks that you can use in this operation as well, they benefit from more cover to mask their position. Right now they just stick out like sore metal thumbs, and they do not last long at all. The tanks can actually be a key piece of the action that might allow the attackers to break through, but if they're given literally zero cover to work with, then for sure you're going to see enemy rocket guns just flying at it from across the map, and the tank's going to explode extremely quickly. I'm actually now quite disappointed that the Red Tide operation has started out this way. Because of all the content that the Russian DLC has, I was looking forward to most the Civil War aspect of it, and the Red Tide operation was a big part of that. Arguably, and I'd strongly argue this, that Operations is Battlefield 1's best game mode, probably alongside Frontlines, but this new offering proves that the game mode still needs to be treated fairly carefully. With the mode itself being brand new to the franchise, it's fair to assume that perhaps the developers aren't 100% on it when it comes to balancing, because it's something new that will improve over time, if it's added to future games, that is. But if the Red Tide operation isn't addressed soon, it may fall to the same fate that many others have, and it may not be played all that much by the community. At the moment, Operations is in kind of a funny place because ever since its release, it's been clear that the matchmaker hasn't quite worked properly, or at least it's struggling to satisfy gamers out there. It puts people into totally empty servers, and as soon as people see that, they quit out of the server, which means continuously the matchmaker is going to pump people into empty servers. It's like its own enemy because it's exposing people that want to play Operations to the one thing that they don't want to see, which is an empty server. There's no queuing function. Let's say Operations limited matchmaking until 10 people were queuing for a 40-man operation, and 20 people were queuing for a 64-man operation. And then once those numbers have been achieved, a new server was started, and then gamers would be able to jump in and try and play. Would that help the problem? Or would sticking Operations in the server browser, as gamers have been saying for months now, would that be the answer? Well, in October, there's going to be an update for Battlefield 1 called the Operations Campaign Update. It seems DICE have got something up their sleeves. I haven't played that much of the Brusilov offensive operation yet, but knowing how flat that Galicia map is, I'm going to assume that the attackers might have a similar issue getting going. But they do have the assistance of air and ground vehicles, and they hold a lot of power in Operations, and that might be able to break the deadlock. Red Tide is very much infantry focused, which is why I think so much of the time the matches end without really much progression being made. I'm going to go and play some more of the operations over the weekend, because despite this one being in quite a bad state right now, it's still my favourite game mode overall, and I'll try and get some time on that Brusilov operation. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments though. I fully expect the top comment to be, put operations in the server browser, and if that isn't the top comment, then I'll be extremely disappointed, but please do leave me some comments below and I'll be reading as many as I can. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.